Hello and welcome back to Dr. Hollowed. In this episode, we're diving into some of the most terrifying paranormal activities people have ever experienced. Please don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy the content. I was living in a crappy apartment. The previous tenant died due to liver failure in the same flat and was found 3 days later. I moved in because I was broke and no one was willing to rent me a flat as a single dude. It was no moon day. This day falls somewhere around October. Just like in the West, the spirits of the dead rise up and roam throughout cities. But we do not celebrate. It is a somber kind of day. I was in a shitty mood after getting into my flat. It was only 8:30 p.m. I started getting angry for no reason. After that, I started hearing footsteps in the flat. There was no one there. My anger and disgust increased to the maximum extent. Somehow I made the connection: there seems to be a ghost in my flat. Whoever that was, I could not identify them. I performed some ceremonies and got relief, but the ghost literally attacked me during the train ride. Ghosts usually try to take over the human body by embracing it. Fortunately, by that time, I had done some specific meditations, and at that exact time, I had practiced them. Had I been a failure, my body could have been taken over by a ghost. So, real-life ghosts are not exciting like they are in movies. The house I grew up in had a shadow person that everyone in the house would see from time to time. For a long time, we all believed we were going crazy. We even checked for carbon monoxide multiple times because we are all skeptical people. One night, I'm sitting in the den with my mom and see the shadow person. I made a comment like the ghost is here or something like that. We had a headlamp turned off but were sitting on a table nearby that started flashing on and off. It did that for at least a couple of minutes while we sat frozen in fear. My mom still lives in the house, and there are strange occurrences from time to time, but that was one of the scariest. I lived in a trailer in a town of 3,000 people when this happened. A friend had come over for the night and left the day this happened. My fiancé worked nights, usually 1 to 9, so I was home alone most nights. Around 2 in the morning, I heard knocking on the door. I looked through the window to see who it was. I saw the same friend who left that day standing there, soaked from the rain. I didn't open the door because something seemed off. I tried talking to him, asking if everything was alright, how he got there, and why he was there. I got no response, just a blank stare. After a few minutes, I gave up and went to sleep. I don't even know what time I woke up, but I woke up to the police knocking. Apparently, my neighbors saw my friend scratching at the door, trying to get in. I just thought I was hallucinating, but apparently not. Other than that, I would hear footsteps throughout the trailer, and objects would move by themselves. I moved not long after that, and I haven't had anything like that happen yet. I work at a 14th century historic house. All kinds of weird stuff goes on, but the one that happened to me took place in the summer of 2018. I was alone on the first floor, closing up at the end of the day. There was one other person in the building. In a room that has a reputation for ghost sightings, I was closing a room leading off it. I was struggling to lock the door as the bolt was stiff, so my back was to the room. There was a huge crash a few feet behind me, as if someone massive had hit the floor from a height. The room shook, and I could feel it through the doorknob in my hand. There's an old suit of armor in that room. The only feasible source of that crash was if it had fallen over. I spun around, and the room was completely still, and the armor was still standing. It scared the hell out of me, so I got out of there as fast as I could. I'll give this story secondhand. A couple decades ago, I managed to get a date with a girl who was really hot. She had dark hair and a somewhat goth look, but not due to any intentional clothing or makeup choices, just very pale skin and striking cheekbones. I had shaved my head recently, on a lark, and she said she liked that. We corresponded over email, that's all there was, no social networks, and met up one day for a date in her city. Like I said, really hot, so I was willing to do long distance and travel every weekend if that's what it took to make this work. We had some getting to know you banter as we were driving around in my car, and at some point the paranormal came up. She said she'd been stalked by a spirit before. I did a double take, but she wasn't kidding, and I want to emphasize that, up until this moment, she presented herself as a normal, intelligent person, probably more street smart than I was. So I gave her the benefit of the doubt. Tell me more. She said some kind of spirit had taken a sexual interest in her. It had crawled into her bed, like leaving indentations where a person would be, and she had pushed it out, but it continued to bother her. In addition to scratch marks, she said it had even physically lifted her and pushed her out of bed. It had turned into this nightmarish struggle for a while. Wrestling with this thing and getting bruised by it went on for weeks, apparently. I was like, that's terrible. I'm really sorry to hear that. How did you get it to stop? She said she had called on the name of Jesus, and eventually it had stopped, not immediately, but eventually. She asked if I was a Christian, and I said yes, which was true at the time, remember, 2 decades ago. I think the conversation segued from that into our faith practices and relatively more pleasant stuff. For the record, I think she was telling the truth, and she seemed to be a balanced, sane person. That was the one unusual thing about her, which I had steered the conversation into. She didn't really volunteer it until asked. So I didn't hold it against her, and I would say I believed her. The relationship never got off the ground because we lived in different cities and it was impractical, but I enjoyed getting to know her on our one dinner and drinks date. My friends and I used to hang out with one of our high school sports trainers, as he was my buddy's family friend. He was a bit odd but nice enough, and we would go to his condo to ghost hunt. I'm pretty sure he made stuff up because he was lonely and wanted people to hang out with, but one night 2 things happened that I cannot explain. We had always played with the Ouija board and other typical things, but then one night he picked up a tape recorder that we decided to try out. We spun the film and started recording, just asking questions out loud as we used the board. 1 minute later, after a question, the tape recorder abruptly shut off when nobody was anywhere near. With 80% of the film left, there was not a single reason why it should have shut off. We rewind the tape and play it back, and 5 seconds before the end, you can hear footsteps leading up to the recorder. We were all sitting. It scared me shitless. In the same place, we were doing the same thing with the board, and the TV began to flicker. It was almost like it was on, but just black with a little backlight showing. This went on for some time, even after I used the remote to power it off and unplug the TV. It made no sense and still makes me think something was going on. I have 2 stories. When I was living in Mexico, I lived in this house where the basement was a crawl space, and if you went down in the basement you could get lost because it was like a maze. Well, one day I was in the living room and I heard a big thud, and when I turned to look there was a giant tall shadow figure that looked like he had a cowboy hat / sombrero, and I looked and I saw it start climbing down the crawl space, and I just said fuck that. I ran to my room and shut the door, and I heard it climb back up, and I heard footsteps come towards my room and stop, and there were sick loud bangs on the door, and the door handle started to rattle, and it just stopped. 10 minutes later I checked and there was nothing there, so I went back to watch TV, and the next day my grandfather told my parents that 1 week ago he saw people in the basement doing a ritual with human blood in the basement, and he held them at gunpoint and kicked them out. I remember one day I saw a sighting outside my house at night on a chair with my dad, and as we were sitting there looking at the church in a field next to our home, I started to hear like horse stepping sounds, and I told my dad and he heard it too, so he told me to be quiet, and as we looked around me and my dad saw a shadow of a man and a horse, so my dad grabbed a light next to him and pointed it, and there was nothing there, and we looked again and saw the shadow again, so my dad just told me to get inside. As went inside and grabbed a gun, he yelled, "Se estás aquí salga ahora," and we were looking and there was nothing there, so my dad closed the door and put the gun away, and my dad told me to just go watch TV, so I began to watch TV, and my dad went upstairs, and not 10 minutes after my dad went upstairs I heard a horse stepping again, and then I stopped as I heard a grunt and a thud outside, and I heard stepping and there 5 loud bangs on the door, and my dad ran downstairs and opened the door and saw nothing. My mom was in the hospital, 50 miles away. I was 19. We were pretty sure this was it. I was home alone. My parents' house is big. It's off the beaten path on a small lagoon. My dad had been staying up at the hospital. That night, I went to bed at about 1 a.m. I was playing on my laptop. My room was in a separate wing of the house. It can be sealed off with a single locking door. The door was shut but not locked. I have always been scared of the dark, so I had the lights in my wing on. So was the closet light. As I was messing around on GameFAQs, I saw the lights in my wing turn off. All of them. The band of light under the door went black. I hopped up in bed and stared at it. My bedroom door was unlocked, and I was debating getting up to lock it when the shut door slammed. As in, it sounded like someone straight up kicked the bottom of the door with all their strength. I remember squeaking in shock. It took me about 6 seconds to be up on both feet with a blade about 4 paces back and just right of the door. I remember thinking that if the door opened, I could be on whoever it was almost instantly. I was also silently cursing that there was no light under the door anymore. There was no way to see the shadow of whoever was out there. Nothing happened. I was fighting off the fear of the situation and stupidly decided that going on a fence was all that was left. I didn't have a phone in my room, and my Nokia was in another wing of the house, charging. I threw the door open with my knife low and my left hand in a guarded position. There was no one there. I tossed the hallway light switch on. There was no one in my wing. There was no one in the house. The burglar alarm was still on. Confused, I turned on the main house lights, sealed the wing off, and locked the door. I went back to my room and just sat there with my laptop open. My bedroom door now has a slight bow in it. A couple hours passed with me warily laying in bed. Around 3 a.m., the lights under the door went dark. Now I was terrified. My knife seemed pretty insignificant, and my previous dumb courage had run out. I scooted my bed, no easy task, against my bedroom door, grateful the door opened inward. It all felt so wrong. Something was angry with me. I retreated to my closet and waited for the sun to come up. When the skylight in my room got bright, my courage returned, and I moved the bed and exited my room. The wing door had been unlocked, which required a key from the other side. I heard footsteps coming down the stairs in the main house and realized my dad was home. I felt a little foolish, as obviously he had been responsible for turning the lights off the second time. I lead my greeting with, "Oh, so it was you who turned all the lights off?" He looked at me and replied, "What? I got home about 10 minutes ago. I have zero clue what happened that night, but it never happened before that night or after. Whatever it was, it seemed to like the dark and wasn't a fan of doors. And it seemed to be in my wing of the house. My parents built the house, and nothing untoward had ever taken place there. My bedroom door at my parents' house still has a bow in it to this day. This was almost 20 years ago. I see it every time I go home. The door bows into the bedroom, while my sister's door on the other side of the hall remains flush against the door frame like the day they were installed. My mom is still alive, and for that, I'm extremely grateful." I was at my friend's house, sitting alone on a couch backed up against a long wall. I'm sitting there, minding my business, when I feel a finger poke me in the back of the neck. It wasn't possible for someone to be behind the couch or reach me from the side without me seeing. It definitely freaked me out, and I rationalized it as a nerve misfiring, causing it to feel like I was being poked. A few days later, I mentioned what happened to my friend, whose couch it was. She looked at me with a shocked look and said that one day she was sitting on the same couch alone and felt a hand brush down her arm from her shoulder. This friend is not someone to make something like that up. I'm still not exactly sure what happened, but it makes me wonder sometimes. Backstory: I have first cousins I grew up with that I was really close to. They were the exact same age and grade as my brother and I, who were 2 years apart. So there were 4 of us together, all best friends. When we were young, their grandparents on the other side, not the ones we shared, moved in across the street from them, and that's the house that all this took place in. First story: when we were really young, my brother and my 2 cousins all distinctly remember playing the exact same game. We all remember it in the same way. We called it the Shadow Man game. My cousin's upstairs bedroom had a large window that faced their grandparents' house across the street, and we would all sit on the top bunk of their bunk bed watching the front porch of the house that had a big brick column, and we would watch until the Shadow Man would peek out from behind the brick column, and then we'd all hide underneath the covers. Again, we all distinctly remember playing the same game, and we all vividly remember legitimately seeing what looked like a Shadow Man pop his head and sometimes his full body out from behind this brick column and stare at us. To us, it wasn't scary or anything like that, just something we thought was a fun game as kids. We were really young when we played this game, I'm guessing maybe 5 or 6. The next time I heard anything about the house was when we were in junior high and a lot of his other family members started talking openly about having experiences. This house was in Illinois, and my cousin's grandparents also had a house in Arizona and would always spend the winter there. When they were in Arizona, a lot of their kids and older grandkids would stay at the house intermittently. Here are some of the second-hand accounts I heard. The oldest cousin, who was in his mid-20s, an avid hunter, and a manly guy who was not really the type to be scared by much, would always stay there. He would usually sleep in the grandparents' room. He was the first one to say there was some weird stuff going on in that house. He said at night, the TV in the bedroom would always turn on around 1 a.m. by itself. He heard a lot of footsteps and things moving like that. Then one night he said he felt something sit on the bed next to him and then intermittently hold him down so he couldn't speak or move throughout the night. In hindsight, that sounds a lot like sleep paralysis, but that was the final straw for him sleeping in the bedroom, and he only slept on the couch in the living room after that. One time my cousin's aunt stayed in the house by herself and went to sleep, and when she woke up, there were tons of sticks and leaves all over the kitchen. She also heard a lot of footsteps and cabinets rattling. Another uncle stayed there once in the bedroom, which had a master bathroom. In the middle of the night, he heard what sounded like a gunshot in the bathroom, got up, ran to see what it was, and saw a bar of soap sliding down the wall like it had been flung against there. My cousin's dad was an avid non-believer and insisted the rest of the family was being ridiculous. He even admitted that one time he had to go over there to grab something from their kitchen when nobody was home, and when he passed through the living room, The TV turned on by itself. We had to cross through the yard of the house to get from my cousin's house to the local pool we all swam at during the summer. One time one of our friends said to my cousin, "Hey, I didn't know your out-of-town cousins were back in town," to which he responded, "They're not," and my other friend went on to tell us how when we passed through the yard that day, he saw a little girl watching us through the window. After hearing all the stories from family about the house, we thought it would be fun for all of us guys to go stay the night there for my cousin's birthday when we were in 8th grade. This was my first time really being in the house, and we brought a camcorder and wanted to do the whole ghost hunt thing. Pretty chill for most of the night, but around midnight we had the camcorder off and put away, and we were getting ready to go to sleep on the living room floor, but we were still kind of egging the ghost on a little bit. All of a sudden, there were just light banging sounds from all over the place. The floors, the ceilings, and the walls just slowly escalated until they were crazy loud. We all ran out of the house and did not return that night. We started going back again when we were in high school and had quite a few experiences. Here are some of those. Probably the craziest one was one night when we were walking around the house and heard what sounded like some cabinets closing or opening on their own in the kitchen. We also heard what sounded like a rocking chair being moved across carpet in one of the bedrooms. We had all agreed before we went in that we wouldn't run out, we were going to try and let it play out. The big event of the night happened while we were all sitting in the living room around midnight. A small cabinet with glass doors just started shaking like crazy, and we all ran out to the front yard, where we regrouped and decided we could go back in. We sat back down on the couch, and I said, "If it is a ghost, it's probably laughing its butt off at us right now." We then immediately heard the loud laughter of a woman come from the kitchen right off the living room, and then it was just a mad scramble to the door, and we didn't go back that night either. One experience I had that I particularly didn't like was one night when we were sitting in the living room. I was wearing a zip-up track jacket, and we all, as a group, decided to hang out in the dining room for a bit. As I got up, somebody grabbed the back of my jacket and yanked down hard enough to get me back down to my buttocks on the seat. I thought it was one of my friends not wanting to be last in line, but when I turned around, I was already the last in line. It probably wasn't as scary as the laugh we heard, but it was extra unsettling to be singled out. We also brought a couple friends who we told about the house and who said they didn't believe in ghosts. We had one stay in the master bedroom by himself, and he only lasted about an hour before he came out, saying he felt what felt like a hand grab his leg. He went back in again and came running out about another 20 minutes later, saying he saw a large shadow figure walk out of the master bathroom. He was the biggest ghost denier I'd ever met, and after like 2 hours in the house, he was admitting there was something up. There was just one specific house when I was growing up that creeped me out. My dad was a realtor, so we moved often. This house, though, was off. My parents converted the garage into a game room, and we never really used the front door, just a door that went into the game room. When you passed that, there was a long hallway past the laundry room, and it finally ended at my parents' room and the kitchen/dining area. I would come home from school, and often there was no one else in the house. That hallway was dark. One time, I felt someone tap me on the shoulder. I turned, and a cold rush of air flew by me. I noped the F out of there and stayed outside until my mom got home. Another time, I was practicing piano, and I felt someone watching me from behind. I was terrified. I just placed my head down on the piano and stayed with my eyes closed until my mom got home. It may sound tame, but it was terrifying. There were other weird noises I would hear from my room, on the opposite side of the house from my parents, and once my brother and sister moved out, I was the only one over there. I would always sleep with a blanket over my head until we moved out. The last thing I remember was having a babysitter with me, and she kept asking why I was looking into a certain corner of the room, the converted garage. I felt there was someone else there, and it was like I saw dark orbs. Scare the crap out of me. Maybe just the racing mind of a child, but once we moved and later on in life, the only thing that happened like that was those damn orbs in one of my apartments in the same town. They only showed up when I was alone. I can't explain any of it, but I had nightmares for a very long time from that one house. The scariest was when I was about 11, at a school camp. At night, our group was taken to the nearby lake to go fishing for eels. On the way back to our accommodation, we had to walk a dirt track that wound its way around the lake's edge. My best friend and I ran ahead of the group and around a right bend, which was out of sight of the 20 kids and handful of adults behind us. As we came around the bend, we both saw what can only be described as the most stereotypical ghost, a young girl in a white dress. She was entirely whitish or bluish and slightly translucent. We screamed and ran back to the group, which was no more than 40 meters behind us. When we all eventually came to the same bend on the dirt track where we saw this girl, she was no longer there. The less scary experience was when I was at the headstone unveiling for a childhood friend of mine who had passed. She was 15 at the time, as was I. Many friends and family were there, and each of us was given a helium balloon to hold on to. We stood in a big circle, said a prayer, and on the count of 3, we all released our balloons up into the sky. The youngest person there was the cousin of my friend who passed. She was no older than 3 years old, perhaps younger. She didn't let her balloon go until 5 to 10 seconds after everyone else had. She eventually let go, but unlike all the other balloons that all swiftly rose into the air and floated off, this little one's balloon slowly rose a meter or two above head height and just hovered in place. Then, without changing its height at all, it slowly began a full circle above the heads of the entire crowd of us. No one said a word, we all just watched, slightly perplexed. Once it made a complete circle, it rose up and drifted away. Perhaps it was just a coincidence, but it definitely felt like something more than that. This was months after my friend had passed, as it took a while for the headstone to be prepared. While this same friend was sick in the hospital, I never visited her. I was young and under the impression her condition would improve, and I was probably just scared to see her in her unwell state. When she passed, I felt immense guilt for not visiting her or getting to say goodbye. A couple nights later, she came to me in a dream. I profusely apologized for my lack of effort to see her. She told me not to worry, that everything was fine, and that she was okay. I had a couple. The first was a TV turning itself on after I had turned it off. I got halfway up the stairs, and it came back on again. I went back down and turned it off, and it did the same again. I assume it was some kind of malfunction, but it freaked me out at the time. I unplugged it, and it stayed off. The second one I have no explanation for. Me and my girlfriend at the time were sitting watching TV one night. We were watching a film and had been on the sofa for at least an hour. It was winter, so no windows were open. We lived on a quiet road, with no big trucks thundering by or anything that would shake the house. Out of the blue, a book falls off the bookshelf at the other end of the room. This was a big book, and it made a hell of a thud. We both jumped, then stared in silence for 5 to 10 seconds before looking at each other like, what the phew. I went over and looked around for anything that may have caused it. I checked all the windows, etc., but nothing. I put it back on the shelf, firmly wedged between other books. We kind of chuckled about it, like, kind of freaky. We went back to the film. I was a little freaked out, but I just assumed it had been put back precariously on top of the racked books, and it had slowly slipped off or something. Around 10 minutes later, it happened again, with the same book. This time, we both stared in silence for a lot longer. I could hear her breathing quickly, and I noticed I was too. I said something along the lines of okay, now that's really freaky, to which she just replied, don't. She got up and put the book back again. She seemed to not want to give it any more thought. She just got back into the film and forgot about it, which is what we did. By the time we finished the film, got some pudding, watched some funnies, etc., it was all but forgotten about, and I didn't struggle sleeping or anything. But it has always stuck with me. I'm as skeptical as they come, but I just can't find a reasonable explanation for it. I was teaching and coaching at a really small rural school. I went in on a Saturday morning to work on basketball stuff. I was the only one at school that day, but occasionally the custodians would come in randomly and clean. So I'm in my office in the locker room, and I hear my last name called out, clear as day. I even rolled my chair back to the door and yelled out, yeah? Silence. I thought it was weird, so I got up and went to the other end of the locker room, and nothing happened. I went up to the gym and all lights were off, no one. I went outside, and my car was the only one there. I went back inside and finished up what I was doing rather quickly. On Monday, I was talking to our counselor, who was also a coach, and our main custodian to see if anyone came in. They both said not to their knowledge. That's when the counselor tells the story of a PE teacher who, like 3 to 4 teachers before me, had a heart attack in the gym and died about 6 to 7 years prior. Since then, people have heard strange noises in the gym every so often. They then asked why I was asking, so I told them the story, and they both got silent and just kind of shook their heads. I never heard anything else again the rest of the year, so I don't know. A number of years ago, I did overnight security at a business complex in downtown Portland, Maine. What I am about to tell you is creepy, but not so scary. I would usually do my nightly rounds around 2A.M. The building had 10 floors, and I always took the stairwell. I had a key card on me, and when I would get up to the 8th floor, there were 2 sides, the west side and the east side. In between was a middle area, separating the 2 sides of the floor. In order to get from one side to the other, you had to use the key card. For instance, say you're on the west side of the floor. You use your key card on the panel, it clicks, and you're able to open the door to the middle area. Then, you use your key card to access the east side of the floor. Again, use your key card, it clicks, and you're allowed in. I would always watch as the automatic doors would close on their own and lock. You could tell they would lock because of the click sound the doors would make. Then, I would walk around on the floor, checking the cubicles, kitchenettes, etc. Here's where it got creepy. When I would come back to the automatic doors, sometimes one door and even both doors would be open. Now these doors have alarms, and the only way that they can be physically opened is with a key card. To this day, I have no idea what was going on those floors. While looking for a place to move into as a kid in high school, we looked at a house that, on paper, was one of those head scratchers. Huge place that was dirt cheap. We joked on our way that it had to be haunted. The first thing the realtor tells us as we step in is, the previous owner hung himself in the attic. So now we are all convinced, which might make the next part lose credibility due to confirmation bias. The basement was partially unfinished, with a literal well that was boarded up. The first bedroom we went into had my name drawn in crayon on the wall, and it looked like it was melting. Apparently the previous owner had a kid with the same name as me. When we went to go up to the attic, a huge gust of very chilly wind hit us as we opened the door. We ran out and told our parents we refused to live there. So it was nothing remotely paranormal, but it spooked us enough. I still live in the town where this house is located. The place goes on the market every few years, with the new owners only staying for a few months each time. The local paper has run a story on it, but none of the owners say anything was haunted, just that they had to move again for one reason or another. With no credibility at all, I proudly tell anyone that I am with when we drive by that house that it is super haunted. I think those people have their memories altered or something when they decide to leave. The house wants to be left alone. I just remembered about the place I rented for a while. It was a flat, apartment, on the back of an old hotel, like a Victorian-era place. I used to walk my dog out the back. There was a gate that led into the forest, New Forest, UK. It was a beautiful place, and being out in the middle of nowhere and in the New Forest, we got our fair share of wildlife. In the winter, there were some nights walking out in those woods that just gave me the willies. Nothing in particular was wrong, I wouldn't see anything, but I'd just feel on edge. Sometimes it would feel too quiet, or the fog would make all the twisty old trees a bit freaky. But a couple of times were really bad. I always felt okay with dogs around, though. As skeptical as I am, I know they say animals go nuts whenever spooky things are going down, so as long as he was around and enjoying the walk, all was cool. I have a pretty strong torch, the type you can focus the beam on. I'd have some nights where it would be fine for the most part, except for random parts of the forest where the light just seemed to not reach very far. I don't know how to describe it. It was as bright as ever, it just didn't penetrate. There was no fog in the air or anything, and stuff right in front of me would be lit up like sunlight, but at 10 meters or so, I could barely see anything. 2 minutes later, in another area, it would be fine, and I'd see like 20 to 30 meters in front easily. Anyway, the worst night ever. It was snowing, and I was out with the dog. The snow was doing that insulative thing and making everything super quiet, and then I had that oppressive darkness type thing happen. Again, it was freaky, but at least Doggo is nearby. Then he just absolutely books it into the bushes, going, gone. I couldn't even hear him anymore. I'm alone in the silence, barely able to see more than 10 meters away. I've never felt fear like it. I don't even know what I was scared of, but I was just paralyzed. I didn't even call for the dog. Eventually Doggo came back, and we went straight home. So yeah, nothing happened, but I've never been able to explain that weird darkness. My sister used to have some weird shit happening at a unit she rented many years ago. She told me stories, but I had never experienced them myself. One time, while visiting her, that changed. We were watching TV, and I went to the kitchen to get a drink. I walked past the bathroom door, which was open. When I came back, it was closed. She hadn't left the sofa, and there was a dodgy tile on the bathroom floor where the door would get stuck. You would have to physically force the door over the tile. No wind, no noise, nothing. That's weird, I thought, but okay. 10 minutes later, we are both sitting there, and we hear this incredibly loud bang 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 on the door that goes to the backyard. She scared the living fuck out of us and made us jump. We looked outside but couldn't see anything or anyone. No dog either. That seemed to be it for the evening, thank fuck, and after talking about it for a while, she went off to bed. I watched TV for a bit more and then decided to call it a day as well. I turned off the TV and stood up. As I'm about to walk away, I hear this noise of something heavy being dragged over wood. I look up, and she has this big dolphin statue on top of her TV cabinet. The statue is just slowly moving forward across the wood by itself. It went about 10 centimeters or so and just stopped. You could see scratches on the wood where it moved. I told her about it the next morning, and she wasn't surprised. The events in that house are the only time in my life I've ever experienced paranormal stuff in person, and I have no rational explanation to this day.